Mr. M-O-M-E-N-T. She prays she never miss a M-O-M-E-N.
Drew Brees is the most accurate quarterback in NFL history. Let's see what this nigga talking about.
When Drew Brees entered the NFL, a 60% completion rate was considered elite. By the time he retired, that bar had been raised to 70% because of him. He also owned the highest career completion percentage in NFL history, had 7 seasons above 70%, and set the single-season record at an absurd 74.4%. While the NFL often celebrates rocket arms and highlight reel bombs, Brees mastered something far more dangerous, the art of surgical passing. Over 80,000 passing yards,
crazy passes,
a Super Bowl that revived a city, and an entire generation of quarterbacks who were forced to chase a new standard he created. And yet, despite everything he accomplished, Brees is often left out when discussing the greatest QBs of all time. So why doesn't he get talked about as often as he should? And why does the most accurate passer the game has ever seen still feel underrated? Drew Brees was never supposed to be an NFL legend. In fact, growing up in Austin, Texas, most people didn't even think he'd make it past high school football. Sure, his dad was a former basketball player at Texas A&M, his mom was an all-state track star, and his uncle, Marty Akins, had once been an All-American quarterback at Texas.
That's what
Brees, he was skinny and undersized. And when he tore his ACL as a junior, many assumed his football career was over before it really ever began. But that moment defined him. He attacked rehab, determined not just to come back, but to dominate.
Well, look at him big-ass pads, man.
His senior year in 1996 was one of the greatest high school seasons Texas football had ever seen. Brees threw for over 3,500 yards, 31 touchdowns, and led Westlake to a flawless 16-0 record and a state championship. Along the way, he shredded defenses, completing more than 63% of his passes and out-dueling future NFL players, including running back Dominic Rhodes in the title game. But despite all of that, college recruiters barely gave him a look. At just 6 feet tall, he didn't fit the prototype. He wasn't the biggest, he didn't have a rocket arm, and scouts doubted his upside. He was named Texas 5A Offensive Player of the Year, earned honorable mentions on national All-American lists, and still his dream schools, Texas and Texas A&M, never came calling. In the end, Brees only received 2 offers, Purdue and Kentucky. He chose Purdue, not because it was a football powerhouse, but because of its academics. And nobody could have guessed that decision would completely rewrite Big Ten history. As a freshman, Brees barely saw the field, but by his sophomore year, head coach Joe Tiller handed him the keys to the offense, an unorthodox spread attack nicknamed basketball on grass. And the moment Brees took over, everything changed. In just his second season,
I didn't know he wore
tied
15.
an NCAA single-game record with 55 completions against Wisconsin and set the record for 83 pass attempts in one game, a mark that stood 15 years. Then, as a senior, Brees led the Boilermakers to unforgettable wins over Ohio State and Michigan, snapping a 33-year drought and clinching Purdue's first Rose Bowl appearance since 1967. That year, he won the Maxwell Award as the nation's most outstanding player, finished third in the Heisman voting, and cemented himself as one of the most decorated quarterbacks in college football.
Ready to launch
By the time he left
man.
West Lafayette, he owned 2 NCAA records, 13 Big Ten records, and 19 Purdue records, finishing with over 11,700 passing yards, 90 touchdowns, a 61.8 completion percentage, and a reputation as one of the smartest, toughest, and most accurate quarterbacks in the country. And yet, despite everything he accomplished, scouts still said the same things they always had. Too short, arms not strong enough, not NFL caliber talent. And at the combine, his numbers didn't silence anyone either. He measured in at 6 foot and a quarter, 213 pounds, a 4.83 40, and a decent 32-inch vertical. Solid? Sure, but nothing that screamed franchise QB. And compared to the hype surrounding Michael Vick, who ran like a running back and threw like a cannon, Brees looked mid at best. The Chargers originally held the number 1 overall pick in the 2001 draft, and they needed a quarterback. But then the phone rang. The Atlanta Falcons desperately wanted Vick, so San Diego decided to cash in, trading the top pick to the Falcons and sliding down to number 5, which was fine, because they still needed a quarterback, so Brees at 5 made perfect sense. But the Chargers looked at Brees, then looked away. Instead, they drafted LaDainian Tomlinson, a running back.
That's not a bad pick, though.
And if that wasn't enough, the first round kept rolling. Team after
team. That's not a bad pick,
LaDainian
Tomlinson,
By the time round 1 was over, Brees was still waiting. Finally, with the very first pick of the second round, 32nd overall, the Chargers circled back and took him. It wasn't the fairy tale first-round moment he dreamed of. It was more like a consolation prize. But that was the story of Drew Brees' life. Every doubt, every rejection, every time someone told him he wasn't good enough, it all turned into fuel. San Diego may not have believed in him at pick 5, but now he had the perfect chance to make the entire league
That's a
regret
nice
passing
team,
on.
though, bro.
So Brees
Or at
spent
least
almost his entire
running
rookie
back,
season
quarterback
watching
duo.
from the sidelines behind veteran Doug Flutie. His only action came in Week 8, when Flutie went down with a concussion against Kansas City. Brees stepped in, threw for over 200 yards, and tossed his very first touchdown pass. It was a glimpse of promise, but just a glimpse. By 2002, San Diego gave him the starting job, and at first it looked like they made the right call. The Chargers jumped out to a 6-1 start. Brees was managing games, and the city had hope. But just as quickly as it started, the magic faded. The Chargers collapsed down the stretch, finishing 8-8, and
Damn.
Brees' season ended with 16 interceptions to
Damn.
just 17 touchdowns. And
Good
by midseason
Lord.
2003, fans were booing. The Chargers were 1-7, and Brees had been benched for the very quarterback he once sat behind, Doug Flutie. But Flutie struggled just as badly, and before long, Brees was handed the starting job back. That season, the Chargers finished with the worst record at 4-12, giving them the
Lord.
#1 overall pick in the draft. They could have used it to give Brees more help, but instead, they went after his replacement. First, Eli Manning. Then, after Manning refused to play in San Diego, they traded him for another quarterback, Phillip Rivers. It seemed like Brees'
Phillip
time was
not
coming
bad
to an end,
neither.
but with everyone expecting Rivers to take over, Brees refused to give
Damn,
in.
bro, they
That
coulda had-
season, he
they coulda
played
had
the
Eli?
best football of his life, throwing 27 touchdowns to just 7 picks, leading the Chargers to a 12-4 record and their first division title.
Chargers,
in a
bro,
decade.
I
He won
mean,
comeback
Eli's
player of the
smart,
year,
but
made the
damn.
Pro Bowl. And for the first time, it looked like Drew Brees had carved out his place. Drew was the first guy that meticulously took you apart with how he played the position and made you bleed out by 1,000 cuts. Former NFL quarterback Trent Dilfer said, "It was about being a surgeon, not a butcher." 2005 only built on that momentum. Another Pro Bowl season, nearly 3,600 passing yards, and wins over some of the NFL's toughest teams. It finally felt like he had survived the storm. But then, in the final game of the season against Denver, everything changed. A fumble hit the turf, Brees dove for it, Broncos safety John Lynch crashed in, and as Brees hit the ground, Denver lineman Gerard Warren fell on top of him. In that instant, his throwing shoulder was shredded. The result was a torn labrum and rotator cuff damage. It was so bad, some doctors questioned if he'd ever throw a football again. Suddenly, the Chargers had a decision to make. Stick with the injured quarterback who had just resurrected his career, or turn the page to the young, healthy first-round pick waiting on the bench. It wasn't a hard decision. They chose Rivers. So just like that, Drew Brees went from a Pro Bowler to unemployed. Now the question was, would anyone take a chance on him? And 2 franchises came calling. They both needed a quarterback. Both could change the trajectory of his career, but only one would take the risk. The first suitor was Miami. Head coach Nick Saban was desperate for a long-term answer at quarterback, and Brees sat at the very top of his list. On paper, it seemed like a perfect fit. But when the Dolphins' doctors examined his shoulder, they believed the risk was too great. So instead of rolling the dice, Miami pivoted. They turned their attention to Dante Culpepper, trading for him and shutting the door on Brees. A decision
Dante
that would cause
Culpepper,
Nick
not a
Saban
bad
to leave
pick,
the
though.
NFL for
That
Alabama
nigga
just a
was
year
nasty.
later. That left New Orleans, a franchise with little stability in a city still reeling from the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. Sean Payton had just been hired as head coach, and he needed a quarterback to build around.
Boy, that Sean
Brees,
Payton
broken
combo,
shoulder
too.
and all, became his gamble. And so, against all odds, Brees signed with the Saints. 6 years, $60 million, a broken quarterback,
6
a broken
years?
city, and a
60
coach
million
willing to
not
put his
bad
future
either.
on the line. From the
Wow.
first night back in the rebuilt Superdome, the atmosphere was electric. Week by week, Brees started to show flashes that silenced all the doubts. A 314-yard, 3-touchdown performance against Tampa, a career-high 510-yard explosion against Cincinnati,
Oh
at
my
the time the
God,
6th most
dots.
in NFL history, a 5-touchdown demolition of the Dallas Cowboys in primetime.
What a
By
dot.
season's end, Brees led the entire league in passing yards with 4,418, earned All-Pro honors, and was even a runner-up for MVP. But more
Fucking
importantly,
dots.
he had transformed a team that finished 3-13 the year before into a 10-6 division champion. In his very first postseason game with New Orleans, Brees guided the Saints to a thrilling win over the Eagles, sending them to their first ever NFC Championship appearance. But in Chicago on a frozen Soldier Field, the Bears' defense was relentless, and the Saints' magical run came crashing down. Brees threw for 354 yards and 2 touchdowns, but costly turnovers and a safety from an intentional grounding call sealed New Orleans' fate in a 39-14 loss.
Damn.
By now, Drew Brees was already the new face of New Orleans. Sean Payton looked like the next offensive mastermind, and fans believed the city's football team was finally ready to chase greatness. However, just when it seemed like the stars were aligning, reality hit hard. The 2007 season opened with 4 straight losses, 3 of them being blowouts. By season's end, Brees had thrown for over 4,400 yards and broken the NFL record for completions in a season. But those numbers didn't change the final outcome, as the Saints stumbled to a 7-9 finish, nowhere near the playoffs. Then came 2008, and with it, Brees' masterpiece. Week after week, he carved up defenses with surgical precision, piling up yardage at a pace only Dan Marino had ever matched. By the end of the year, Brees had thrown for 5,069 yards, just 15 shy of Marino's all-time record.
That's MVP.
He tied Rich Gannon's record with 10 300-yard games, earned Offensive Player of the Year, and became only the second quarterback in NFL history to cross the 5,000-yard mark. But here's the thing. While Brees was playing quarterback at a historic level, the Saints' defense was collapsing. No matter how many leads he built, they couldn't hold him. The team finished 8-8, missing the playoffs again. But those 2 years revealed something important. Brees wasn't just back from injury, he was better than ever. And as the frustration in New Orleans grew, something was brewing beneath the surface. Because in 2009, the city, the team, and Drew Brees were about to reach heights no one thought possible. In Week 1 against Detroit, Brees threw 6 touchdown passes. The very next week, 3 more, as the Saints steamrolled the Eagles. Against the undefeated Giants in Week 6, Brees was untouchable. 23 completions on 30 throws, 4 touchdowns, and a passer rating that was nearly perfect. And when adversity finally hit, they didn't fold. In Miami, the Saints dug themselves out of a 24-3 hole. Win after win piled up. Atlanta, Carolina, New England, where Brees absolutely dismantled a Bill Belichick defense with 5 touchdown passes and a flawless passer rating. By December, the Saints were 13-0. The Superdome wasn't just loud, it was shaking. The city had wrapped its arms around this team, and the players carried that energy. Sure, they stumbled at the finish line, dropping their final 2 games, but with the #1 seed in the NFL already locked up, no one cared. New Orleans had never seen a team like this, and it came at a time when the city so desperately needed something to believe in. The regular season had been magic, but everyone knew legacies weren't built in September or October. For Drew Brees and the Saints, the real test was January. The divisional round brought the Arizona Cardinals to town, fresh off their own wild playoff win.
Y'all
But from the opening
and y'all was
snap,
playing
New Orleans made it clear
Julio
there would be no
Jones
shootout this time. Well, at least not for the Cards. Brees carved up their defense for 3 touchdowns as the Saints hung 45 points on Arizona. Then came the NFC Championship against Brett Favre and the Minnesota Vikings. Every possession was chaos. Turnovers, hard hits, momentum swinging back and forth. Favre, battered but unrelenting, kept dragging the Vikings down the field. Brees, steady as ever, answered with 3 touchdown passes. And late in the 4th, with the game tied, the Vikings had a chance to end it. They were in field goal range when Favre rolled out looking for one last dagger. Instead, he threw across his body straight into the arms of Saints cornerback.
I remember that shit.
The game went into overtime, and when Garrett Hartley's 40-yard field goal sailed through the uprights, the impossible became real. New Orleans Saints were going to the Super Bowl. And that's where they met Peyton Manning and the Colts. The matchup looked lopsided on paper. The polished, playoff-tested Colts versus the franchise that had never been there before. Early on, the Saints fell behind, but Sean Payton had a card to play. One that would go down as one of the boldest gambles in NFL history. To open the second half, he called for an onside kick. The risk was insane. Fail and Manning gets the ball at midfield, but the Saints executed it perfectly, recovering it and causing the tide to turn. And Drew Brees went to work. He completed 32 of 39 passes, tying the Super Bowl record. Late in the 4th, with the Lombardi Trophy on the line, he rifled a pass to Jeremy Shockey to give New Orleans the lead. And then, history. Tracy Porter jumped Manning's pass, sprinting the other way for a pick-6 that sealed the game. The Saints were Super Bowl champions, and Drew Brees was named Super Bowl MVP. But the real victory was what it meant. Just 4 years after Hurricane Katrina devastated the city, Brees stood on that podium, confetti raining down, holding his baby boy in one arm and the Lombardi in the other. It wasn't just about football. It was about hope. And a city that had been counted out, just like Brees himself, finally rising to the
Fucking
top of the
insane.
world. But Brees was far from done. Coming off that Super Bowl, the Saints entered 2010 with a target on their backs. They weren't the lovable underdogs anymore. They were the hunted. And Drew Brees carried the pressure of proving the championship wasn't a one-time miracle. And he delivered. 7 different games with 300-plus passing yards, a 6-game winning streak late in the year, and another 11-win season. But in the playoffs, fate sent him to Seattle. What should have been a routine wild-card matchup against a 7-9 team turned into the game forever remembered for the Beast Quake. Brees threw for over 400 yards.
Young
He kept the
Marshawn.
Saints alive until the very end. But Marshawn Lynch was unstoppable, and he ended New Orleans' season. In 2011, Brees dissected defenses with surgical precision. By mid-season, he was already shattering benchmarks, becoming the first quarterback in history to eclipse 4,000 yards in only 12 games. And by December, the inevitable happened. Dan Marino's 27-year-old single-season passing record finally fell. And when the dust settled, Brees had posted 5,476 yards, 46 touchdowns, and an unheard of 71.2%
Oh my God,
completion.
Gots.
Those were numbers that
Gots.
forced the league to rewrite what greatness meant. You could put every
Fucking
quarterback
Gots.
in the league on the same field and tell them to throw all of the same routes. And you were just going to notice something different about the way Drew places the football. When and where, said former NFL quarterback Luke McCown. The Saints stormed to a 13-3 record. And in the playoffs,
no MVP
Brees
is
put up
crazy.
nearly 500 yards in one game, 462 in another. It felt like destiny was bending in their direction. Until San Francisco. In one of the most dramatic finishes in playoff history, Vernon Davis's last-second touchdown catch ripped it away. Brees had just authored one of the best seasons ever by a quarterback, and still, heartbreak found him at the final whistle. Then came 2012, a year that tested far more than football. The Saints were rocked by Bountygate, a scandal where the NFL accused New Orleans of running a bounty system that paid defensive players for injuring opponents.
We've got to do everything in the world to make sure we kill Frank Gore's head. We want him running sideways. We want his head sideways.
Because of that, Sean Payton was suspended for the entire season, the harshest punishment ever handed to a head coach. Overnight, the Saints were leaderless. They opened the season 0-4. And yet, in the middle of that chaos, one constant remained: Drew Brees. That season, Brees broke Johnny Unitas' legendary 47-game touchdown streak, a record untouched for over 50 years, and he stretched it to 55. And even without his head coach, he once again crossed 5,000 yards, proving that no scandal, no suspension, no storm could stop him. And by 2013, stability returned. Sean Payton was back on the sideline, and with him, the Saints regained their edge. Brees wasted no time in reminding everyone who he was, posting another 5,000-yard season.
My Lord.
At that point, while no other quarterback in history had even managed 2. He became the fastest to 50,000 career passing yards as the Saints went 11-5 and stole a road playoff win in Philadelphia, but once again fell short against Seattle in the end.
Oh my God,
Through it all,
Marshawn
one
Lynch
truth
is
became
nasty,
impossible
dude.
to ignore. The Saints lived and died by Drew Brees. No matter the obstacle, no matter the chaos, his accuracy and resilience kept New Orleans among the NFL's elite. But here's the thing. Football isn't a one-man sport, and no matter how sharp Brees was, his defenses were horrible. In 2014, the Saints went 7-9, but what hurt more was that they lost 5 games by just 1 score. It didn't matter that Brees was breaking records in completion percentage or that he tied for the league lead in passing yards with nearly 5,000. Each game felt like he was trying to win a shootout. In 2015, the Saints again stumbled to 7-9.
You have to
This
when
time,
your
Brees
defense
was
is not
playing for a
good.
torn plantar fascia, an injury so painful most quarterbacks won't even suit up. And somehow, even on a bad foot, he still threw for nearly 4,900 yards, 32 touchdowns, and even tied an NFL record with 7 touchdown passes in a single game against the Giants.
Gosh.
Then 2016 was a season that perfectly captured the paradox of Drew Brees. He threw for over 5,200 yards, led the league in passing again, added 37 touchdowns, and completed 70% of his passes. It was his 5th career 5,000-yard season. Let's put that in perspective. At the time, every other quarterback in NFL history combined had just 4. But once again, the Saints finished 7-9. Drew Brees needed help, and in 2017, he got just that. For the first time in a long time, the Saints felt balanced. They drafted Alvin Kamara, built an offensive line that could actually protect Brees, and finally had playmakers on defense, like rookie Marshawn Lattimore and veteran Cameron Jordan. Suddenly, Brees didn't have to carry the entire weight of the franchise on his right shoulder anymore. And after stumbling to an 0-2 start, the Saints rattled off 8 straight wins.
Damn.
And Brees set a new single-season record with a 72% completion rate. By December, he had joined the 70,000-yard club and led New Orleans back to the playoffs for the first time in years. And once they got there, Brees looked as sharp as ever, carving up Carolina in the wild-card round. But next up was Minnesota.
Oh my
a
gosh.
tense back-and-forth playoff war that went right down to the wire. With just seconds left, the Saints had clawed their way into the lead and stood on the brink of a trip to the NFC Championship, 10 seconds away from survival, 10 seconds away from a miracle of their own. But in one snap, everything unraveled. Case Keenum launched a desperate throw toward the sideline. A defender closed in and then
Stephon Diggs,
suddenly,
I remember
Stephon
that
Diggs was
shit, bro.
racing for the end zone untouched. The
I
crowd
remember that
erupting
shit.
as time bled off the clock. What should have been Brees' triumphant playoff return instead became the Minneapolis Miracle, one of the most heartbreaking walk-offs the NFL had ever seen. Now,
That
most
shit was
quarterbacks,
crazy.
especially at 38 years old, don't get many more shots after heartbreak like that. But Drew Brees wasn't finished. In fact, in 2018, he somehow got even better. That season, he completed 74.4% of his passes, an NFL record that still exists, as the Saints finished 13-3, locked up the #1 seed, and powered their way back to the NFC Championship. Against the Los Angeles Rams, it was another hard-fought battle. With under 2 minutes left, the Superdome was shaking. Drew Brees had just hit Ted Ginn Jr. for a 43-yard bomb, putting the Saints at the Rams' 13-yard line.
What a
This was
fucking
it,
catch.
the moment New Orleans had been waiting nearly a decade for.
Breeze.
Oh, I remember this shit. Yo, that shit is crazy.
Everyone saw it.
Absolutely,
The Rams defender
absolute
barreled through
robbery.
before the ball ever arrived. Clear as day, obvious, unmissable. Even the defender was looking for the flag, except that flag never came. So instead of going for the win, the Saints had to settle for overtime. And in a cruel twist, their season was ripped away
That
by
shit
the
is
no-run,
fucking
no-call.
crazy, bro.
A year later, disaster struck. Brees tore a ligament in his thumb on his throwing hand, forcing him to miss 5 games of the 2019 season. But instead of walking away, Brees returned in late October.
That
and
shit was
immediately
crazy,
looked like
bro.
himself, picking apart defenses with his trademark accuracy.
Like, that's
And
the
then
most
came
blatant
Week
no call
15
I've ever
against the
seen.
Colts. On Monday Night Football, Brees delivered one of the greatest performances of his career. 29 completions on 30 attempts. An
Damn.
NFL record 96.7% completion rate with 4 touchdowns.
Oh
The
my
Saints
gosh,
stormed
that was
to
a
a
hospital
13-3 record. And in the wild card round, with the season on the line, Brees pieced together a clutch 7-play drive in the final minutes to set up a game-tying field goal and force overtime. But it wasn't enough, as New Orleans lost in overtime 26-20. And
God.
Brees, now 42 years old, was running out of time. In 2020, the Saints opened against Tom Brady's brand new team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Good
And Brees
Lord.
led a clean, efficient performance in a 34-23 win over Brady in his debut with Tampa. A few weeks later, the two would meet again, and this time Brees lit up the scoreboard, throwing 4 touchdowns in a stunning 38-3 beatdown.
God,
Football
Lord.
has a cruel way of humbling even the greatest. Because in Week 10 against San Francisco, Brees absorbed a hit that left him gasping for air. What doctors later found was almost unthinkable: 11 fractured ribs and a collapsed lung. Most quarterbacks wouldn't even think about coming back. But for Brees, there was no decision to make. This was his team, his city. He had to fight to return. 4 games later, battered but unbroken, he stepped back onto the field against the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs. He wasn't perfect, but his toughness alone lifted the Saints. And on Christmas Day against the Vikings, in front of a national audience, Brees crossed yet another milestone, becoming the first quarterback in history to throw for 80,000 yards. New Orleans rolled to its 4th straight division title, and suddenly, the story felt like it was building towards something special. The playoffs carried that weight. First came Chicago in the wild card round, a steady workmanlike win. Then the divisional round. Fate had drawn a matchup too perfect to ignore. Drew Brees versus Tom Brady, 2 legends. The stage was set for a classic. Brees fought, but his arm betrayed him. Passes that once sliced through defenses instead fluttered into the wrong hands. 3 interceptions later, the scoreboard read 30-20 Buccaneers. After the game, Brees lingered on the field. He tossed a football to his kids, smiling.
Yeah, that was the retirement
All of a
right
sudden,
there.
The city knew it was watching his goodbye. A few weeks later, on March 14th, exactly 15 years to the day he signed with New Orleans, Drew Brees made it official. The man who had rebuilt a franchise, lifted a city from its darkest hour, and rewritten the record books was retiring. He arrived in New Orleans when the city was broken, when the team was terrible, when hope felt hard to come by. And through sheer precision and perseverance, he gave the people something to rally around. But greatness always comes with a price. 2 decades of throwing lasers against the best defenses in the world left scars that no trophy can heal. Today, the arm that once carved up secondaries is so worn down, he can't even lift it above his shoulder. In fact, when he plays catch with his kids, he has to throw left-handed. And maybe that's the perfect symbol of who Drew Brees really was. Never the biggest, never the flashiest, never the fastest, but always the most relentless. A perfectionist who squeezed every ounce of ability out of his frame, and in doing so, rewrote the very definition of accuracy in the NFL. And
he got him
still
one,
underrated. The man threw for 80,000 yards, stacked up more records than almost anyone in history, and became the most precise passer the game has ever seen. But when people debate the greatest of all time, his name rarely comes up. Why? Because he wasn't throwing no-look passes like Mahomes. He didn't have the cannon arm of Favre, and he wasn't backed by a dynasty like Brady. When you watch Aaron Rodgers run around the backfield for 25 seconds and throw a 70-yard pass across his body on the money for a touchdown, there's a wow factor that is easy for the casual fan to appreciate. That's former Saints right tackle Zach Strief. Drew throws 35 passes in a game, and all 35 of them are within 2 feet of where they were intended to be. You'll walk away from that game going, man, that guy is efficient. But you don't necessarily walk away going, that guy is a freak in nature. Now, in reality, he is absolutely a freak of nature, but the flash is not there for him. That's the irony of Drew Brees. The very thing that made him great, the surgical precision, the consistency, the perfection, was so routine that people took it for granted. And that might be the biggest proof of his greatness. And hey,
oh my God, I know this
stick with
video is good.
Subscribe and check out some of
I know this
Larry
video is
Fitzgerald.
good. This is the best catching wide receiver I think I've ever seen in my life. This nigga Larry Fitzgerald is so fucking goated. Oh my gosh, bro. This nigga Larry Fitzgerald is so fucking different, man. Good Lord. I'm gonna watch that shit later. That boy, Larry Fitzgerald was different, bro. And him and Julio Jones, both of them niggas are fucking absurd at catching the fucking football. Both of them.
Mr. M-O-M-E-N-T. She prays she never miss a moment.